A city bigger than medieval London rises from a floodplain, crowned by towering mounds. And 2 centuries later, the people are simply gone. A kingdom that controlled deserts with water engineering vanished into sand. A civilization that built pyramids 5,000 years ago in Peru left no written language, then walked away from its sacred centers as drought tightened its grip. History isn't a straight road, it's a shoreline. Civilizations arrive like tides, crest in brilliance, and sometimes retreat so completely that only broken stones and half-remembered myths remain. Tonight, we're traveling across 10,000 years and 5 continents for 21 forgotten civilizations that completely disappeared. No fantasy, no legends dressed as fact. Only what archaeology, climate science, and historical records can verify. Some of these collapses were slow, like empires bleeding out over centuries. Others were shockingly fast. One generation building monuments, the next abandoning them to jungle and dust. And as we move through these lost worlds, a question will haunt every chapter. What makes a society resilient? And what makes it vanish? Fact 1. The Akkadian Empire. When the world's first superpower broke. The Akkadian Empire, c. 2334–2154 BCE, is often called the world's first true multi-ethnic empire. Under Sargon of Akkad, Mesopotamia was welded together by military conquest, trade routes, and a centralized bureaucracy. Akkadian kings ruled from cities that controlled irrigation-fed wheat fields and caravan networks stretching to Anatolia and the Persian Gulf. But around 2200 BCE, the climate changed abruptly. Archaeological layers in northern Mesopotamia show towns thinning out, farmland abandoned, and people moving south. This aligns with the 4.2 kilo-year aridification event, a centuries-long drought that struck much of the Old World. Evidence suggests harvest failures and mass displacement destabilized Akkad's tax and grain system. Inscriptions from later kings speak of famine and chaos. A defensive wall, later called Repeller of the Amorites, was built to slow nomadic movements sparked by drought. The weakened empire then fell to the Gutians from the Zagros Mountains. Akkad didn't merely shrink, it fractured so thoroughly that its capital's exact location is still debated. Its disappearance became a Mesopotamian cautionary tale about climate, governance, and overreach. If drought could crush the first empire on Earth, what happened when the monsoons died in South Asia? Fact 2. The Indus Valley Civilization. Cities without kings, gone without war. At its height, c. 2600–1900 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as Harappan, covered over 1 million square kilometers, including sites like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and Dholavira. These cities were astonishingly organized. Grid streets, standardized bricks, public bath complexes, covered drains, and reservoirs. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, there's no clear evidence of palaces or royal tombs. Power may have been more distributed, with civic planning replacing kingly monuments. Yet by about 1900 BCE, urban life unraveled. Construction slowed, long-distance trade faded, writing disappeared from seals, and populations drifted east towards smaller settlements. The most supported explanation points to long-term climate stress, weakening summer monsoons and drying rivers. Geological studies indicate shifting river courses, including changes around the Gagahakra system, undermining agriculture and transport. Instead of a single apocalyptic event, the Indus world seems to have dissolved in stages. Cities hollowed out as people adapted to a changing environment. No conquering army is clearly tied to the fall. The civilization didn't explode. It evaporated, leaving behind quiet streets and wells that would fill with sand for 3,000 years. Fact 3. The Minoans of Crete, the island power that couldn't outrun the sea. The Minoan civilization flourished on Crete and nearby islands from roughly 2000–1450 BCE. They built sprawling palace complexes, Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, with multi-story layouts, colorful frescoes, storerooms packed with olive oil and grain, and plumbing systems centuries ahead of their time. Minoan ships carried pottery and saffron across the Mediterranean, linking Egypt, Anatolia, and Greece. Then, around the mid-2nd millennium BCE, the island world began to shake. Literally. The Thera, Santorini eruption, around 1650–1600 BCE, was one of the largest volcanic blasts in human history, sending tsunamis across the Aegean and ash into the skies. Coastal settlements on Thera were buried. Crete likely suffered flooding and economic shock. But archaeology shows the final collapse of Minoan palaces came later, around 1450 BCE, suggesting a longer chain, disaster-weakening trade, internal stresses, and possibly Mycenaean takeover from mainland Greece. By the time Linear B writing appears, the distinct Minoan political culture is gone. Their language still isn't fully deciphered. What remains are fresco ghosts, blue dolphins, red lilies, painted by artists who never imagined their world would vanish into someone else's empire. Fact 4. Caral Supe, Norte Chico, the oldest cities of the Americas, silenced by drought. Long before the Maya or Inca, Caral Supe, also called Norte Chico, thrived on Peru's coast, c. 3000–1800 BCE. Caral's pyramids, sunken plazas, and ceremonial stairways are contemporary with Egypt's early dynasties. Yet this civilization had no pottery, no metal, and no known writing. Instead, it relied on cotton trade, fishing economies, and irrigation agriculture fed by Andean rivers. Recent excavations at related sites like Vishama show famine imagery and friezes, emaciated figures, desperate scenes, implying social memory of hardship. The best evidence links Caral's abandonment to a prolonged drought around 2200 BCE, part of the same global climate disruption that hit Akkad. Populations appear to have relocated rather than being annihilated, rebuilding in nearby valleys while preserving Caral's sacred architectural ideas. So the civilization didn't die in fire. It moved, leaving behind America's first monumental cities to the desert winds, as if the continent itself had taken a breath and exhaled them into history. One question. If Caral was the first, who became the forgotten middle children of the Andes? Fact 5. Tiwanaku, a high-altitude sacred state that broke under thirst. Tiwanaku rose near Lake Titicaca in modern Bolivia, c. 500–1000 CE. At 3,800 meters above sea level, it was among the highest urban centers ever built. Its stone temples, Akapana Pyramid, Kalasasaya Platform, the Sun Gate, suggest a state ruled through ritual authority and regional alliances rather than armies alone. Tiwanaku's agricultural miracle was its raised field system, engineered plots that trapped moisture and reduced frost, supporting dense populations in a harsh environment. Around 1000 CE, however, lake core and isotope studies show prolonged drought across the Titicaca Basin. Water levels fell. Raised fields failed. As crops collapsed, political cohesion unraveled. Tiwanaku's influence fragmented into smaller local groups, and the capital's monumental core was abandoned. Unlike conqueror-driven collapses, Tiwanaku looks like a system pushed past its environmental threshold. Their gods didn't leave in a single night, but over generations, until a city that once managed altitude like magic became a quiet ruin above the clouds. Fact 6. The Olmec, mother culture of Mesoamerica. Then a blank spot. The Olmec flourished along Mexico's Gulf Coast, roughly 1500 to 400 BCE, centered at San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. They sculpted colossal basalt heads, some weighing 20 tons, likely depicting rulers. They developed early Mesoamerican writing and the ritual ball game, and their iconography influenced later Maya and Aztec religions. Yet by 400 BCE, Olmec ceremonial centers were abandoned. The reasons remain debated. River shifts that undermined farming, volcanic disturbances, internal conflict, or trade routes drying up. There's no clear invasion layer, no single catastrophe. Instead, The Olmec heartland seems to lose population and political gravity until it ceases to function as a civilization. What makes Olmec disappearance haunting is their foundational role. Later societies inherited their symbols, but not their identity. Like a spark that lights a continent, then burns out before anyone can name it, the Olmec vanished while their legacy lived on in others. Fact 7. The Nok culture, Nigeria's iron artists who faded into soil. The Nok culture, c. 1500 BCE 1 CE, occupied central Nigeria and produced some of sub-Saharan Africa's earliest known terracotta sculptures. Expressive heads with pierced eyes, elaborate hair, and ritual body marks. Archaeology also shows iron smelting at sites like Taruga by the 1st millennium BCE, meaning Nok communities jumped into Iron Age technology without a Bronze Age phase. Then, around the start of the Common Era, the Nok material tradition stops abruptly. Settlements thin out. Terracotta production ends. The culture doesn't transition into a clearly identifiable successor state. Hypotheses include climate drying of the Sahel, soil exhaustion, disease, or shifting trade paths. Looting complicates the record, but controlled excavations confirm that Nok, as a coherent civilization, disappeared. What remains are fired clay faces staring across 2,000 years, proof of a society that mastered art and metal, then slipped away without leaving a written goodbye. Fact 8. The Cucuteni Tripilia mega-settlements, Europe's first cities, that burned themselves out between roughly 5,000–3,000 BCE. The Cucuteni Tripilia culture spread across modern Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. They built some of prehistoric Europe's largest settlements, concentric town plans with thousands of houses, possibly housing tens of thousands of people. Their pottery was strikingly sophisticated, swirling red-black-white designs, figurines, and ceremonial vessels. But by 3000 BCE, the mega-settlements dissolve. Evidence suggests cycles of planned burning, houses intentionally torched, possibly as ritual renewal, became unsustainable as populations grew. Climate shifts toward drier conditions and pressure from incoming steppe pastoralists, linked to Yamnaya migrations, likely destabilized farming societies. Tripilia didn't collapse into a new empire. Its huge towns, almost urban, returned to fields. A civilization that may have pioneered early city life in Europe vanished so thoroughly that it had to be rediscovered in the 19th century, buried under wheat and silence. Fact 9. The Hittite Empire, Bronze Age power, snuffed out in a regional storm. The Hittites ruled Anatolia, modern Turkey, from about 1600–1180 BCE, with a capital at Hattusa. They fought Egypt to a standstill at Kadesh, used chariots and ironworking, and maintained archives in cuneiform that describe diplomacy, plagues, and royal succession intrigues. Then the late Bronze Age collapsed. Around 1200 BCE, Hattusa was abandoned and burned. Trade networks broke. Multiple factors converged. Prolonged drought in the eastern Mediterranean, internal instability, and attacks by migrating groups often called the Sea Peoples. Hittite authority fractured into smaller Neo-Hittite city-states, but the imperial structure and identity were gone. It's one of history's earliest examples of systemic collapse, where an interconnected world failed all at once. The Hittites didn't just lose a war, they lost the world that made their empire possible. Fact 10. Cahokia, North America's metropolis, that emptied overnight. Cahokia, near modern St. Louis, flourished as the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico, c. 1050–1350 CE. Its monk's mound rises like an earthen pyramid. Its plazas, wood hinges, and neighborhoods suggest a planned urban center with a population perhaps in the tens of thousands. Cahokia sat atop continent-wide trade in shells, copper, and stone. But after 1200 CE, signs of stress appear: deforestation, soil exhaustion, flooding problems, and social conflict. The population began to fall. By about 1350 CE, the city was largely abandoned. Some people migrated to other Mississippian towns, Others dispersed into rural settlements. The old civic religious center never recovered. Cahokia's disappearance is eerie because it happened fast. A metropolis sunk into forest and floodplain memory, leaving only grass-covered mounds for European settlers to wonder who built them. Fact 11. Chaco Canyon, ancestral Puebloans. A desert network that ran out of timber and rain from about 850–1150 CE. The ancestral Puebloans built a regional system centered on Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. Great houses like Pueblo Bonito rose 5 stories high, aligned with solstices and lunar cycles. Roads cut straight lines across mesas for tens of kilometers, suggesting pilgrimage, trade, or political integration. But Chaco was ecologically fragile. Timber for construction was hauled from distant mountains, implying local forests were exhausted. Tree ring records indicate severe droughts in the 12th century. As water and wood ran short, Chaco's system unraveled. People migrated toward the Rio Grande, Mesa Verde, and other areas, carrying cultural traditions but abandoning the canyon's monumental heart. Chaco didn't fall in battle, it fell in logistics. A complex society in a harsh land pushed beyond its resource ceiling, and the desert reclaimed its cities. Fact 12. Great Zimbabwe. Stone cities that lost their trade. Lifeline. Great Zimbabwe thrived between the 11th and 15th centuries CE in southern Africa. Its dry stone walls, built without mortar, formed a royal complex and a vast enclosure. The city grew rich through trade in gold and ivory, linked via the Swahili coast to Arabia, India, and China. By the late 1400s, Great Zimbabwe was largely abandoned. Archaeologists point to a combination of environmental exhaustion, overgrazing, deforestation, population pressure, and shifting trade routes favoring newer centers like Kami. The state dissolved into successor polities, but the original capital, and the civilization it symbolized, was left behind. Centuries later, outsiders refused to believe Africans built it, inventing myths of Phoenicians or biblical kings. The truth is simpler and more tragic. A powerful civilization rose on trade and vanished when trade moved on. Fact 13. Rapa Nui, Easter Island. The society that carved giants, then starved. Rapa Nui settlers arrived on Easter Island around 1200 CE and built a culture famous for the Meroë, massive stone ancestor statues transported miles to coastal platforms. For centuries, clans competed through monument building, ritual authority, and horticulture in a thin island ecosystem. But by the 1600s, the society was in crisis. Pollen and charcoal records show near total deforestation. Without trees, canoes shrank, soil eroded, and crop yields dropped. Oral histories record violence and upheaval. By the time Europeans arrived in 1722, the population had fallen dramatically. The once cohesive statue-building civilization no longer functioned. Rapa Nui's disappearance is a microcosm of environmental overshoot. On a small island, there was nowhere else to go. The Meroë still face inland, like guardians waiting for a world that won't return. Fact 14. The classic Maya collapse, the jungle cities that went quiet. During the classic period, c. 250–900 CE, Maya city-states like Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Calakmul erected pyramids, stelae carved with kings' names, and observatories tracking the heavens. Their population may have reached into the millions across the lowlands. Then, in the 8th–9th centuries CE, the inscriptions stop. Monument building ends. Cities are abandoned. Evidence points to interlocking causes: repeated droughts, deforestation, soil depletion, and intense warfare between rival states. Recent climate proxies reveal multi-year drought windows severe enough to destabilize food and water systems. But even drought wasn't the only driver. Political fragmentation and people choosing to leave urban life also mattered. The Maya didn't go extinct. The civilization of the great lowland city-states did. Their descendants survived in new forms, while the jungle swallowed their capitals like a closing fist. Fact 15. Angkor, Khmer Empire. a hydraulic civilization that drowned and dried Angkor, capital of the Khmer Empire, 9th–15th centuries CE, was among the largest urban complexes of the pre-industrial world. Its temples, Angkor Wat, Bayon, Ta Prohm, rose from an engineered landscape of canals, reservoirs, and moats that controlled monsoon water for rice production. This hydraulic system was Angkor's strength and its vulnerability. From the 14th century onward, evidence suggests extreme climate swings, long droughts punctuated by destructive floods. The waterworks silted and fractured. At the same time, trade routes shifted toward coastal ports, and the kingdom faced wars with Ayutthaya, Siam. By 1431, Angkor was effectively abandoned as a political capital, with power relocating south. A city built to command water was undone by water's absence and excess. Today, its towers still rise through trees, like a drowned metropolis frozen mid-breath. Fact 16. The Nabataeans, desert traders absorbed by empire. The Nabataeans turned the deserts of Arabia and the Levant into a trade empire from roughly the 4th century BCE to the 2nd century CE. Their capital Petra was carved into rose-red cliffs, fed by ingenious cisterns and dams that gathered flash flood water. They controlled routes for frankincense, myrrh, spices, and luxury goods moving between Arabia, the Mediterranean, and Mesopotamia. In 106 CE, Rome annexed Nabataea, rerouting trade and integrating the region into imperial administration. Over time, Nabataean language and identity faded into the broader Greco-Roman and later Arab world. Their cities were not instantly destroyed. They were slowly emptied as commerce shifted and empire absorbed them. Sometimes disappearance isn't fire. It's paperwork, taxes, and new roads that make old ones irrelevant. Fact 17. The Kingdom of Aksum, Africa's great power, that withdrew from the sea. Aksum, c. 100–900 CE, in modern Ethiopia and Eritrea, was a Red Sea superpower. It minted coins, built towering stelae, and traded with Rome, India, and Arabia. By the 4th century, it adopted Christianity under King Ezana, becoming one of the world's earliest Christian states. Then, Aksum retreated inland. Causes likely include soil depletion from intensive farming, political pressures from rising powers, and a shift in Red Sea trade after the spread of Islam redirected maritime networks. By the 10th century, the Aksumite urban system had dissolved, replaced by smaller highland kingdoms. Aksum's identity survived in Ethiopia's later cultural memory, but the Aksumite civilization, as a global trading empire, vanished with the sea routes that sustained it. Fact 18. The Tarim Basin city-states, Tocharians, Silk Road oases, turned to sand. In China's far west, the Tarim Basin once hosted thriving Indo-European-speaking oasis states like Khotan, Lulan, and Nia, 1st millennium BCE, 1st millennium CE. They prospered off Silk Road traffic, supported by irrigation in a desert ringed by mountains. Their mummies, blonde-haired, wool-clad, show a unique cultural blend of East and West. But desertification, river course changes, and shifting trade paths weakened these oases. Some were abandoned as water sources failed. Others were absorbed into expanding Chinese and Turkic empires. By late antiquity, the distinct Tocharian languages disappeared. Their fate is written in geography. When your civilization depends on a river in a desert, the river's smallest turn can erase your world. Fact 19. The Mycenaeans, Greece. Before Greece, lost in the Bronze Age crash. Mycenaean civilization dominated mainland Greece from about 1600–1100 BCE. Fortress palaces at Mycenae, Pylos, and Tiryns stored grain and oil under warrior kings who used Linear B writing to track resources. This was the world later echoed in Homer's epics, Agamemnon, Troy, the Age of Heroes. Then, around 1200–1100 BCE, the palaces burned. Trade collapsed. Populations dropped. The causes mirror the broader Late Bronze Age breakdown: drought, internal revolt, earthquakes, and invasions. Greece entered a dark age where writing vanished for centuries. The Mycenaean world didn't transition smoothly into classical Greece. It died, and Greece had to be rebuilt from its ashes. Fact 20. Norse Greenland. When the world turned cold and the sea closed, Norse settlers led by Eric the Red colonized Greenland around 985 CE, founding eastern and western settlements. They raised cattle and sheep, hunted seals, traded walrus ivory to Europe, and built churches that linked them to Scandinavia. But by the 1400s, Greenland's Norse colonies were gone. The Little Ice Age shortened growing seasons and expanded sea ice, making trade and travel harder. Overgrazing and soil erosion weakened farms. Meanwhile, European demand for walrus ivory declined, undercutting the colony's economic lifeline. Contact dwindled. The last written record is a 1408 wedding at Valsey Church. After that, silence. Some vanished civilizations are erased not by enemies, but by the slow closing of climate and commerce. Fact 21. The Kingdom of Kush at Meroë, the Nile rival. That went quiet south of Egypt. The Kingdom of Kush revived in its Meroitic phase, c. 300 BCE, 350 CE. Meroë became a center of iron production, long-distance trade, and distinctive pyramids smaller and steeper than Egypt's. The Kushites had their own language and script, still only partly understood. In the 4th century CE, Meroë declined. Pressures likely included deforestation for iron smelting, shifting Nile trade patterns, and attacks or competition from the rising kingdom of Aksum. By around 350 CE, the city was abandoned, Kushite political identity dissolved, and the Meroitic script ceased to be used. A civilization with pyramids, iron, and its own writing system disappeared so completely that even its words became a riddle. What these lost worlds teach us. Across these 21 civilizations, patterns emerge like constellations. 1. Climate is a silent king. Akkad, Indus cities, Caral, Tiwanaku, Maya, Angkor, Norse Greenland. Different peoples, different eras, same reality. When rainfall shifts or temperatures swing, political systems crack. Not instantly, but relentlessly. 2. Complexity is power and fragility. Cahokia, Chaco, Angkor, Hittites, Mycenaeans. The more a society depends on a tight network, roads, canals, trade partners, timber supply, the more vulnerable it is when one link fails. 3. Disappearance doesn't always mean death. Caral's people relocated. Maya descendants survived. Nabataeans merged into later populations. Civilizations can vanish as identities, not necessarily as humans. 4. The past isn't gone, it's layered beneath us. Every lost civilization is also a warning and a blueprint. Their ruins are less about mystery for mystery's sake, and more about how humans behave under pressure, how they adapt, split, migrate, or collapse. And maybe the deepest lesson is this: civilizations disappear not because humans are weak, but because humans are human. Brilliant, hopeful, competitive, sometimes reckless, often resilient. Standing in the shadow of these vanished worlds, we realize history isn't a museum of completed stories. It's a living laboratory. Somewhere right now, a river is shifting course. A trade route is being replaced. A drought is lengthening. A city is growing faster than its land can feed it. And the people inside those systems don't feel like they're living in the end of an era. They feel like they're living in normal life, just like the Akkadians did, or the Maya farmers did, or the Khmer engineers did. The ruins we've visited tonight are reminders carved in stone. Nothing lasts forever, but everything leaves a trace. If you want a part 2 with another 21 lost civilizations, deeper, stranger, and even more forgotten, tell me in the comments. And until then, keep looking at the ground beneath your feet, because history is still there, waiting.